welcome to Taking Liberties Radio, episode 14 for season 6. My name is Lee. I am Western Australia. Joining me, of course, is Vikas in Canberra.
Yay.
It's freezing cold there? Because it is freezing cold here.
It's actually been warmer than usual this winter. I would be expecting minus temperatures, and so far we've had very pleasant, positive 1 and 2 degrees. So
Lovely. Well, I have got my cup of tea here to warm my very freezing cold hands. So if people see that, you know why. This week, speaking of hot, we're going to be having some hot takes, of course, on... I did some terrible segue. We're going to talk about the tanker explosion in the Gulf of Oman, which apparently is the beginning of World War III. Thanks, Donald Trump, the peacenik candidate. And we're going to talk about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. An incredibly important piece of legislation that you probably don't know about, but is important to your life. So let's start off with...
It's in the cross sections.
Let's start off there, because I think there's going to be more discussion there than Orange Man wants to go to war. So Section 230 of the Communication
and Decency.
The Englishing today. The Communications Decency Act this is a US piece of legislation that contained a raft of things, a lot of which was overturned by the Supreme Court. But the Section 230 is what exempts online platforms from being sued because of what content they host. So I would argue that this is, and not, I don't think unreasonably, that this is the building block of the internet as we know it. However, we'll get to it. You can have your say. It is something that's being currently discussed by numerous politicians, by, I'd say mostly on the right. People who are upset with how Google and Facebook, FANG, we will call it, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, what's N? Whatever it is. The major tech companies.
Yeah, what is N?
I don't know. Let's look it up. The major tech companies and
but basically this started from Pinterest last week, in case people missed out or basically rely on the mainstream media for all their news. So Project Veritas is a company, it's investigative journalism with a very serious conservative bent.
Yes.
That's not to say they don't do investigative journalism. They just do it with a conservative bent.
Yeah. They go after the damn liberals.
Yeah, they go after the damn liberals. And they've done a good job. I mean, they exposed stuff that was going on at Acorn with some serious fraud that was going on, which actually resulted in federal defunding of it, which then really shrunk that organization. They found Planned Parenthood was doing some shady shit as well. And that's
selling the baby parts.
They were selling baby parts, yeah. I didn't want to bring it up because I couldn't remember exactly to what extent.
Yeah, well, that was the claim anyway. I think some of these things would be contentious.
Yeah, I didn't know exactly. I didn't know exactly if it was an isolated issue or whether it was across all Planned Parenthood. And I remember the big point was this was one area that was acting out of accordance with the rest of Planned Parenthood. And I know people have brought that up several times. So I was going like, I don't know if it was an entire Planned Parenthood-wide thing or whether they found one spot where that was happening. But yeah, I mean, they do investigative journalism, and they do it with a conservative bent.
Yep.
It's no different from Four Corners, which does investigative journalism with a very left-leaning bent.
Sure.
The only difference is these guys aren't state-backed. So they basically did an expose on Pinterest. So they had a whistleblower come forward with emails and proof that Pinterest had basically been banning pro-life discussions. Right? So particularly a pro-life website was banned. So if you tried to post links from there, you wouldn't even see what the error was. You'd just be told there was something went wrong.
Yep.
So it was a form of shadow ban. And it had been listed as pornography or something like that. And then it had been listed as publishing false and misleading evidence. Anyway, the point is basically there was a whole bunch of weird stuff that Pinterest was doing. And this guy basically came out with some emails. He also pointed out the Trust and Safety Committee of Pinterest also engages in meetings with the Trust and Safety Committee at Facebook and the Trust and Safety Committee at YouTube. The point is, he was pointing out that there was some collusion going on, not collusion, but like some cartel-like behavior going on there with respect to content censorship. When he came out, so Project Veritas's accounts got suspended. Their video that did this got what is it? So you can't even share that video anymore because it's been locked out for privacy reasons. So they said there's been some sort of privacy complaint, but it's not a legal complaint because there haven't been any legal notices served to Project Veritas as of this point.
Sure.
And
I mean,
anyone,
it's possible that it could be some sort of DCMA, digital DMCA.
No. So Digital Millennium Copyright Act notice. So it's a takedown notice.
Yep.
So no, it's not one of those because as soon as those go out, you receive a notification and you receive the address and contacting information of the person who issued that notice. It's required by law that they do that.
Okay.
So it's not one of those. And not just that, but we found out Stephen Crowder actually had the Project Veritas people on there and the guy who leaked it. And his video that had them on has now also been flagged for privacy concern. So there is a bit of shadow ban going on with this particular story. And obviously, like anything else that, it's the Streisand effect. As soon as they start to try and ban things, the more people talk about it. Now, the reason why we're talking about Section 230, right?
Yep.
Is because Senator Ted Cruz has been harping on about how technically these organizations, and he's talking about YouTube in particular, are curating information in a way that makes them publishers and not carriers. So the concept is, if you're a carrier, you're meant to be neutral, right? You are meant to let all things go through your. The example I use is, so say if you call up on your phone and you say, I don't like my telephone company, right? You aren't going to all of a sudden have your telephone click out on you and have your account suspended, right? So that's what carrier status means in the US. It means you're content neutral. You allow all content to pass through. You don't censor or curate it. Now, if you're a publisher, you do censoring and curating, and therefore you then become liable for things like defamation and what else. So he's basically kicked off on that topic, saying like, oh, these things are meant to be neutral, but they're clearly showing they curate content, and they're showing clear processes and things like that to indicate that they are functioning as publishers now. And you've got Democrats like Beto O'Rourke also jumping in on that. So it's getting to the point where there's a bit of bipartisanship in that discussion. I think it's not this story that's convinced me that they probably aren't carriers anymore. It's their behavior. Huh?
You mean that they're not publishers or that they're not carriers?
I mean, they're not carriers. I think they are publishers. Yeah. I think they've... look,
as the law stands, by virtue of being publishers, they can't be sued. Like, that's what Section 230...
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, they would need to change the Communications Decency Act to whether they carry... Like, whether they're publishers or not. Well, they are publishers. Like, that's just...
No. But the condition, the condition of Section 230 is that they have to be content neutral and behaving like carriers. That's the main point. That's the main reason they were giving the exemption. That's why they are publishers, and that's why they can't be sued. Sorry. The point is, basically, the argument was made, right, when the Communications and Decency Act was being written, that this little thing, the internet, right, if you sue the people that are basically operating as publishers, but working as carriers of information, right, then you're going to basically stifle innovation. That was the big argument for this entire section, right? The idea was that despite the fact that they were technically publishing information, they were doing it in a content neutral way, right?
I don't think there's any requirement to be content neutral in Section 230.
Huh?
I don't think there's any requirement to be content neutral in Section 230. I think it's just it is a blanket you know,
No, 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 no. It's not.
liability
No,
screen.
I'm not saying it's in the legislation. No, I'm saying the argument was made that this section had to be put in because they were being content neutral, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know enough about who was saying what at the time. I mean, whether, regardless of whether there is historical statements at the time or not, that's not relevant. I don't think that's necessarily relevant because they don't know the internet as we know it.
I think it's absolutely relevant because they effectively a small group, a cartel, effectively is formed out of a government protection.
What? No,
Area.
you're smoking crack. Please put down the crack pipe. It's not. It's not
No,
a cartel.
I'm not.
It's not a cartel. How is it? How is it a cartel?
Well, we now have proof that they work together with trust and safety committees to shadow ban people.
So
That is effectively a cartel.
yeah, but that
They're curating content together. There is
okay.
evidence now.
Sure,
with
great.
that
So
they're
what?
moving together. That's
Like,
a cartel.
there's not.
Definition of a cartel.
It's not a cartel because there's people outside the cartel. Like I presume Gab allows this stuff to be posted.
Yeah, but Gab
It's not
also
like,
gets.
or Minds or Steam It or name Reddit
Yeah,
or
but
like
yeah,
you want to say
yeah,
Reddit's
but
a
you
small
saw-
platform?
Yeah, but you saw as well as I did. In fact, actually, I had to go 5 pages deep to find on Google this particular story.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So either the search engine optimization algorithms, right, and people know how to do SEO, right?
Yeah.
Either they are being tampered with to bury this stuff so far down.
So what if
Right?
they are?
I,
I don't even think it's relevant. I mean, I honestly, I don't even see it like I don't think there needs to be a requirement for them to be neutral to get this protection. I mean, it's really like
No,
like,
we-
in terms of like I mean, I guess there's two approaches to it. Like in terms of the consequence, if you want to take a consequential action argument on this area on removing Section 230 for the big tech companies, it would eliminate like the Web 2.0, like the notion of user generated.
No.
It would
No, it
it would
would-
obliterate it into space. It would just be like it would disappear.
no,
Because
it wouldn't.
but you would make every publisher of any social media content would be liable for what those users say. That's the effect of Section 230.
Yeah.
So essentially, you would have to turn Facebook into the Wall Street Journal. You'd have to have them have an editorial.
You
panel.
mean like what they're already doing?
They're not already doing it because you know
They're-
why? Because I can get on there and say Facebook is the biggest load of bullshit ever. I can get on there and say Vikas Nayak is smelly and his taste in movies is awful, and you can say you are a poopy Headley Herridge.
Yeah.
And that's like the Facebook would have to moderate. They would not moderate. They would have to editorially monitor all of that.
Yeah.
'Cause
Okay. so
every
this is
single
what I-
thing that's said by a user would be Facebook would be liable for.
Yeah.
That's it.
So that's
Full stop.
Yeah.
All user generated content would go out the window because there is no the algorithms they have even cannot moderate what they've got going on at the moment, let alone having to check if every single content would expose them to defamation.
Okay. So, firstly, they already do that to a certain degree, right? And they're doing it particularly with relation to certain political views.
Sure.
So they're already editorializing, and that's the point.
They're not.
Right? So they've already breached that point.
They've not breached that point.
They have.
Like they're not like okay. Maybe you have
When-
a different
when-
definition of editorial than I do, but like when I think of editors, like when I deal with Nicola at Liberty Works and say, okay,
Yeah.
Nicola, you are the editor of these opinion articles. What
Yeah.
do you want me to say? Facebook does not do that. They say, we think some of this stuff is racist, whether it is or not, like whether it is offensive
Yeah.
or not, whatever reasoning they have. They just say, we're
Yeah.
not going to let you say these things. But you could get on there and say, Stephen Crowder is the biggest legend there has ever been. You could say Alex Jones is a genius beyond compare. Like if I go to the Australian,
I have to point out one thing. The argument that's actually happening in Congress isn't to get rid of Section 230. It is to actually amend Section 230 to include the arguments from 1996 into there, requiring content neutrality.
okay, well that's
So
sure.
that's the actual argument going on. In
I don't
But
know how
my-
much that solves it because who gets to decide content neutrality? I mean, that is essentially. I mean, that. Oh, geez, that has some first.
so
I
in
imagine
the
that has some First Amendment issues. because
No,
it essentially
no, no.
would be-
So in the US, it would effectively mean these organizations fall under the First Amendment. So a clear example of that would be what happened with radio and what was it, the Equal Air thing? The Equal Air Act
oh yeah,
ended up
fairness doctrine, which
yeah,
was
the Fairness
shit,
Doctrine, yeah,
and
yeah,
like
which got
unlibertarian.
yeah, it was incredibly unlibertarian, and that got struck down
Yeah.
as well the First Amendment, right? So what
Oh
would actually
no, fairness doctrine was around for like 50 years. It was repealed by Congress, I believe.
was it?
Yeah,
I
no,
was
I'm
pretty
pretty
sure
sure
it got knocked
fairness
down on the
doctrine
First
was around
Amendment.
for a pretty long. Like it actually lasted like a fairly decent length of time. But like, I mean, I guess we don't need to know the history of that, but like, I guess we can sort of focus on the argument of what's involved. Okay, okay.
No, it's sorry. Fairness
okay.
doctrine is not the same as the equal time rule.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
right. Sorry.
so we're confusing two different
Okay,
things.
yep.
Yeah. So yeah. So what they're actually arguing is something similar, basically saying that it does have to be content neutral, and I suppose that would mean effectively what they're saying is the First Amendment would then apply to Facebook, Google, etc., etc., etc.
Okay.
And the argument basically goes they're already going into curating effectively. So part of editorializing is curating your content, right?
I don't know to the extent that they are curating, not in any meaningfully relevant definition of the term. So, like, you could say curation is.
I think when
we think of curation, so like, okay, if the argument is that Facebook is becoming a publisher like The Australian, it is not in any way, shape, or form. Not until Zuck is like telling us what to post on Facebook. What they're doing is saying you cannot post certain things and certain people cannot post on our site. That's a totally different thing from being the editor-in-chief of the entire internet, which is the claim, which is like what I hear from you and others. Like, this is not just you. Like,
I didn't say that they are the editors of the internet, but I did say they have a large control over the news that flows on the internet. Right?
Sure, because I mean they have a large user base.
So they control.
That's...
I think so out of search engine results and everything like that. Yes, they control a very large amount. Now I'm not saying currently. I'm not saying shut them down. Yeah.
No one's saying to them, but like what is being proposed by people is that the government should essentially force them to accept certain content on their platforms, which I am against, because for all the problems there are with like the nature of corporations and the coziness of corporations and blah, all of that, in the end, these are still privately held companies with privately held servers.
Well, you said so earlier. Web 2.0 only exists because of legislation. So they exist because of government protection.
Well, no, because I mean, I don't know if defamation would exist as a thing.
Well, defamation springs from torts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in America especially, defamation is purely tort law. Okay. It comes from common law.
I mean, that isn't to say it would not have evolved that way, because like this is a different, as in, like the application when you because the nature of common law is when you approach a new sort of realm of activity, you'll have a different set of, so like. As is it formed. I mean, there's a history of these things. I'd actually recommend Reason Magazine have a number of podcasts and articles on the history of Section 230, so I might link to some of them, because it's actually quite an interesting history. I don't think that the freedom we have to talk, which essentially comes from 230, is necessarily like only because of the feature of government. I mean, to an extent.
Well, no, that was your claim. No, that was your claim. Like, I just said they behave like a cartel, right? Yeah. They crossed over the threshold.
But they're not a cartel, because not everybody's in there. OPEC's a cartel. Well, it used to be. It's not anymore.
Hang on. Your definition of a cartel is everyone has to be in there. Then there's no cartels on the planet at all. Full stop.
Well,
there is no such thing as a cartel with every member being in there. So, for example, OPEC doesn't consist of every oil-making country.
Sure.
Right? The drug cartels do not consist of every drug maker.
That's a good point. Fair point.
Yeah, that's not actually the rule. I mean, the rule is just you've got an oligopoly that controls the majority, not even the majority, but like
a large portion.
Sure. Yeah, the plurality.
I mean, my point is, in the end, it doesn't, even if it was a cartel, it doesn't matter. Like they
I
can do whatever they want.
I think it matters because they're getting to the stage where they are interfering in the news dissemination process. And they're doing it because they own media companies now, and the media companies they bought are hurting. Right?
Sure, but I mean, you can get other things on Amazon other than the the Washington Post.
Yeah, sure. But no. Look, what's happened is they're so my argument is they're slowing the dissemination of news. Therefore, from a utilitarian, not from a utilitarian perspective, but from a public interest perspective,
Yeah.
we're effectively losing control of our grip of our ability to gather information.
I mean, I think that is like so unbelievably overstated. Like, just like, I mean, if that really is true, then why are we able to so freely talk about? I mean, we're going to post this on Facebook. We're going to post this on YouTube.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, I mean,
yeah. So
I don't give
my
a flying
question is
fuck about the Alex Jones, but you know, sure, like at least half of this podcast is highly critical of YouTube and Facebook getting rid of Alex Jones, like, and all of that.
Yeah, but we're
like,
also
sure, to an extent they are stopping it because they've banned a few users, but like,
So
it's not like they're shutting down all of this discussion. It's not like, you know, the Facebook SS is out there burning the books.
So
it's made it somewhat harder for a guy with like 2.3 million weekly radio listeners to like get a hold of his content, but not that much harder. Like,
so what I was actually going to say is I'm curious whether this video will stay up there, because a lot of videos that have been talking about this have been getting the privacy issue shadow ban within 24 hours. So we'll see how long this video is up for.
And we have to, I mean, recently we have discussed about the nature of like just algorithms being shitty. I mean, in all these things, I still come down on the side of just incompetence over malice.
Algorithms, it's not incompetence of the algorithms, right? The rules are set for those algorithms, right? This is a software engineering thing. Someone comes up with a rule set, right? And they apply that rule set across the algorithm. Yeah. It's not, you're not right about, I don't think it's incompetence. It's the person actively wanted to target as right a net as possible.
Sure.
So it is, yeah. So when it comes to algorithms,
here's the question though. Like, if we want to get to the point of malice, I mean, we're wobbling all over the place, so hopefully we'll get to a point eventually. But, you know, if you go to the software engineers and say, "Are you trying to ban our podcast?" I suspect they're going to say no. Like this thing. Like they would probably say, "Hey, look, you just got caught up in the net."
Yeah.
I don't think they're like, actually, this is not Nazi Germany, but, you know, with Zuckerberg, where like they're like sitting around a table saying, "Let's make sure the Jews can't talk."
No, this isn't Nazi Germany. So, like, this is just Brave New World.
It's called, yeah, okay, sure. It's
just Brave New World. I'm not arguing that it's 1984. I'm arguing the opposite, right? You're inundated with crap because, not crap.
Are you saying that people are being like lulled into a sense of stupidity by Facebook? Because Alex Jones is not on Facebook. Because that's Brave New World. Brave New World is not like, so 1984 is that the people are being suppressed and they can't think for themselves because of all the propaganda. Yeah. Brave New World is people just like openly embracing like the drugs to blank out their minds.
Yeah.
And you think the problem is Alex Jones can't get on Facebook, and
I never mentioned Alex Jones.
I know, but that's like this, he's the cause celebre before, you know, or Stephen Crowder, like, you know, sure, okay.
Actually, so Stephen Crowder, my big thing about him is,
I mean, to be honest, I don't think Stephen Crowder's been kicked off Facebook at all yet, has he?
No, and that's actually the point. Is they're just shadow banning his videos now. Okay. So they've moved them so that you actively have to join his channel. And you actually have to look at it every day to see a new video. So, which is, I mean, pretty obvious what they're trying to do there. But that's a different topic altogether. Sure. This is the Project Veritas one.
Yeah, let's give it. Sorry, I mean, let's
issuing privacy notices.
Okay, which, I mean, in the articles that I've tried to read about this, because we talked about this before. You know, we were discussing this topic before we started the show.
Yeah,
it's there. So Pinterest at least is claiming that that it's related to like. Basically, they've got filters for like medical conspiracies. So again, you know, I tend to come down on the side of it's incompetence. Who knows? It's hard to know these things, but
it's hard to come down on the side of medical incompetence when you have the email from their trust and security person saying that we just wanted to ban it.
Okay,
and we couldn't find the category.
Sure.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to do that when you've got the email.
And so I am fine with that if that's how they want to run their platform. That is fine. I don't think the government needs to come in and start like co-opting private servers and private apps and then forcing them under the First Amendment, which, to be honest, no other media organization is subject to. So, like, the Wall Street Journal is not subject to the First Amendment. Wall Street Journal can get up and say, the aliens have taken over, they're all lizards, we're all going to die tomorrow, if they want.
Howard, I think you might be misunderstanding.
They are subject to defamation,
Yeah.
But that's the nature of.
I have a suspicion you might be misunderstanding the First Amendment there. So if the First Amendment is applicable to your publishers, right? And in a Web 2.0 context, the argument, at least as I understand from Beto O'Rourke or Ted Cruz, is that they can't allege, right, that a piece of content is harassing or mean words or whatever else without something that would make the Supreme Court happy.
So let's be clear. Back in the 70s, the ACLU just defended a bunch of Nazis walking down a street in Illinois, Skokie, Illinois, waving actual Nazi flags, and that was found under the First Amendment. So essentially, it's the government saying to Facebook, if Nazis want to have swastikas all over their Facebook pages, you need to allow that, because that is protected. Essentially, it would. I mean, that's what it means. Like, essentially, to be fair, this is something that people are already trying to do. So Jordan Peterson just this week has announced, I think it was on Joe Rogan's show, saying how he's going to have a social media platform where the only reason things can get taken down is because of a court order.
Yep.
And that's fine. Like, I think it's an interesting idea. Like, I'm probably not going to use that platform just because I don't have any need to. If he wants to do it, go for it.
I'd actually imagine it's probably a little bit more than just, swastikas or something like that. I'd imagine, like, if someone's on a terrorist watch list, I'm pretty sure they can go down and say, please take down this Facebook page or something like that.
I don't know if that would be First Amendment.
I don't know. I don't know exactly what's going on in Ted Cruz's head and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're kind of saying these vagaries, but like from my perspective, I sit there and go like, look, I think that they've crossed the threshold in terms of what they're doing with respect to curating. I think the Project Veritas thing has quite shown that they're just as hostile to whistleblowing as any government is. And what I would like to see is, I think the threat of government action should be enough to get them to actually, what I would like to see, right, ultimately, is basically these organizations saying, here are the rules for you to understand, right? And I know some people are going to go, oh, there's a terms of service and all of this other stuff, right? But the terms of service doesn't, if you've ever read any of their terms of service contracts and stuff like that, it doesn't actually say, we will ban you based on this. Yep. There is no list.
Sure.
Right? And what I am hoping, right, I actually don't want them to go down this route. I don't want them to go down the government route, right? But I'm hoping that the threat of government action, right, and enough public pressure on this is enough to get Facebook to go, okay, here is what the community guideline looks like. Here are the rules that you guys have to live under, right? And these are the only things we will kick you out on, right? No vague terms or anything like that. Like just here are 10 things that we will kick you off for.
Sure. So I think that there's a bet, like basically, if this is a thing that bothers users, they will fix it because the users are leaving. And so I don't think I actually think the notion of government involvement in this whole thing is actually not going to help at all. No. Because ultimately they can rig the system to benefit them.
Yeah.
Because as Zuckerberg said, like, you guys can make the rules and we'll help you write them. Well, it's not going to be in Gab's interests or mine's or ThinkSpot or anybody else's interest, whatever Facebook comes up with. So I actually think the lack of government action here is what's important, because people will just leave. And we've probably seen that in our circle of friends. People are either minimizing the use of Facebook or wouldn't even use it altogether if it wasn't for the fact that everybody's on Facebook, which I'm fine with. Like, I actually think that is the response. The response is, don't use Facebook. You're not required. Plenty of people don't.
So what makes that complicated? So the biggest competitor to what do you call it? The biggest competitor to YouTube is BitChute.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
Now, certain networks in Australia actually ban BitChute.
Yep.
Right? And it's because apparently the video of the New Zealand.
The Christchurch.
The Christchurch shooter gets shared there every now and then. Just like how what was the other one? What's the name of the other website?
Live Leak.
That one's another one that's banned on a lot of ISPs.
Yeah.
So what we're finding is there's a little bit of issues there with these websites getting banned.
Sure.
So that's what's actually making. So I would have expected, like Gabs or MeWe or any of these things to really start taking off, right, in a massive way. And the reason it hasn't. So I'm for example a Telstra customer, right?
Yeah.
And if I try to go to BitChute, it goes like, sorry, like I can see the BitChute link on Google. But then I click through and it won't come up.
Yep.
Right? Because it's banned, because they don't want to show the New Zealand thing. So I sit there and go like, okay, so there's some real telecommunications problems here.
Sure.
So it's not just the case of you just make your own website. You actually need to rebuild the stack from the physical layer up in some situations.
Which I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to downplay that. Like, say, oh, you should just start your own, as if that's like an easy thing. I'm not saying it's an easy thing.
No.
It's a possible thing. Yeah, and
I think it's made possible by the fact that telecommunications in most countries is incredibly regulated. In the US, it's the US. It's regulated by the FCC, so it's really hard to start your own ISP. In Australia, it's impossible. Because
so ISP is different. But again, I think you and I would both argue that these things should be left to the market, but let's leave that aside. Now I'm talking specifically about, the apps, like the platforms. So like, yes, it is hard to create an alternative to YouTube, but like people did it. I mean, not maybe so much YouTube because it's the original kind of the thing, but like
it's not the original. They were just the first ones that got big because they paid their creators.
But we have seen the fact that Twitter exists, it is a competitor of sorts to Facebook. It's not. There is within the market a feedback loop that affects these companies.
Sort of, but it's kind of distorted.
And let's just be clear: like the number of people who are really, really pissed at these,
it's small. Yeah,
it's small. So like, okay, maybe Facebook was not friendly to conservatives. Okay. I feel bad for you. I don't think the government should get involved. I think that would be bad. And it would kill the internet for everybody. Like, if you go after Section 230, it's going to,
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen people who basically reckon that Blogspot is that is how it should be. That was the prime. Like, the days before social media when the world was run by blogs. Like, that's somehow a win for open communication between the plebs.
No, but like I said,
people who publish which I think is kind of a Gen X thing for people who publish in the Spectator or whatever. It's like, that's great for you. You have a platform.
Yeah.
But like for us normies, like for us the little people, social media is how we communicate. Like, don't go after it.
So like I said,
you have the final word. We can keep going forever. So this is the final word.
I said, my main thing is I'm hoping enough pressure is put on them that they can actually make the rules. I agree. The market would be best. But there are market distortions that kind of prevent the market from working in here. Namely that these guys have formed a large enough cartel in the advertising space. And namely that there are legislations that basically really prevent new starters from coming up as a result of government control in the ISP space. So, like I said, I'm hoping that the threat of government, the threat of government action is enough to force them to just go like, okay, fine, here's what you users have to live by, and I'd be happy with just that. If they did that and stuck to that, I'd be happy with that.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll leave it at that. Thanks everybody for joining us. We didn't even get to the tanker thing. Guess what? Trump's not the peace candidate after all. There we go. Done. Sort of.
I don't think it really matters. It's a fucking tanker. I'm sitting there going like it's Gulf of Tonkin Mark II or Iraq weapons of mass destruction Mark II. Whatever you want to call it.
I'm sure the drums for war will still be beating this time next week. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Let's see if the video's still up next week.
Yeah. Well, they'll still have crisis actors by this time next week. So, all right. Thanks everybody for joining us. We will be back again next week. We're going to talk about maybe the tanker, maybe World War III. Who knows? Thanks, everybody.